The grand lobby of the Harrington Tower was still buzzing with conversation when it happened. Olivia Bennett, CEO of Bennett Lux Group, the woman whose name appeared on the covers of 3 industry magazines, that quarter was walking through the atrium in a white silk gown that cost more than most people earned in a month. A man in a worn button-down shirt stepped out from behind a service corridor at exactly the wrong moment. The coffee in his hand went sideways. The gown caught every drop. The silence that followed lasted only a half second. Then came the sound, sharp and clear, of a palm across a cheek. The man did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply reached into his shirt pocket, placed a matte black card on the marble counter beside him, and looked at her with the steadiest eyes in the room. 3 seconds passed. Then someone behind the front desk made a phone call, and everything, very quietly, began to change. Jonathan Hale woke at 5:45 every morning without an alarm. Not because he was a man of rigid discipline, though he was, but because Amelia woke at 5:50, and he had learned, over 7 years of doing it alone, that he needed those 5 minutes first. He used them to stand in the kitchen in the dark, set the coffee to brew, and look out the small window of their apartment on the 4th floor of a building 2 miles east of downtown. The city out there was still mostly asleep. In the quiet, he could think clearly. He preferred it that way. Amelia was 7, with her mother's eyes and her father's habit of noticing things other people missed. She had once told her teacher that the classroom smelled different on rainy days because the old carpet held moisture near the baseboards. The teacher had mentioned it to Jonathan at pickup, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. Jonathan had simply said she was probably right. At home, she called him the best fixer in the world, a title he wore with the same quiet seriousness he gave everything else. She did not fully understand what he did for work. She knew he went to a tall building, that people called him when things stopped working, and that he always came home by dinner. Jonathan had been facilities and technical manager at Harrington Tower for 2 years. The role suited him. It demanded precision, a low profile, and the ability to move through spaces without drawing attention. He knew every electrical panel, every pressure gauge, every access corridor in the building's 42 floors. He also knew that the people who passed through the lobby each morning, the executives, the investors, the consultants in tailored suits, rarely looked at the man checking the HVAC system beside the elevator bank. He did not mind. He had spent the last several years actively preferring not to be looked at. Olivia Bennett had built her company in 9 years from a boutique textile firm with 12 employees into a luxury fashion conglomerate with offices in 4 countries. She was 32, and she carried the particular kind of confidence that comes not from inherited position but from having created something from nothing through sustained and relentless effort. She was not cruel by nature, but she had developed, through years of high-stakes negotiation and public scrutiny, a very precise sense of how situations should unfold, and an equally precise intolerance for when they did not. That evening, the tower's event space had been booked for the Bennett Lux annual investor reception. 300 guests. 2 months of planning, a guest list that included the most influential names in the industry. Olivia had arrived early to supervise the final setup, moving through the room with her assistant Sophia Grant close behind, adjusting centerpieces, approving the lighting, exchanging the kind of calm and authoritative words that made staff move faster without feeling rushed. She had done everything right. She always did. Jonathan had been called in that evening to address a pressure variance in the cooling system, servicing the east wing of the event floor. It was a routine issue, the kind resolved in under 20 minutes with the right equipment and without disturbing a single guest. He had entered through the service corridor, completed the adjustment, and was making his way back when the corridor door and the main atrium path converged in a narrow throat near the west side of the lobby. He was carrying a paper cup of coffee he had picked up from the staff break room. He was watching his footing on the polished floor. He did not see Olivia step out of the side hallway at the same moment he emerged from the service door. The collision was gentle by any physical measure, a brush of shoulder against shoulder, a slight jostle, but the cup tilted, and the coffee still warm. A pale amber arced across the front of the white silk gown in a slow, irreversible sweep. Time compressed in the way it does in moments of high consequence. Olivia looked down. The stain was vivid, spreading at the edge with the particular cruelty of fabric that absorbs instantly. Around them, the lobby shifted. Conversations dropped in pitch. A cluster of guests near the bar turned to look. A woman near the entrance raised her phone without thinking. What happened next? Olivia would later understand as a reflex, the result of a specific kind of fear that had nothing to do with anger. It was the fear of losing control of something she had spent months building in front of people who were evaluating her every hour. Her hand moved before her mind could intervene. The sound it made was clean and definitive. A slap, open-palmed, across Jonathan's left cheek. Across the lobby, the silence that followed was deeper than the one before. Jonathan Hale stood exactly as he had before the impact. He did not raise a hand. He did not step back. He did not change his expression, except in the most minimal way, a slight steadying of his gaze, as though something inside him had simply chosen to absorb the moment and file it away. He looked at Olivia for 2 full seconds. Then, with no urgency at all, he reached into the breast pocket of his shirt, produced a card, and set it on the marble surface of the check-in counter beside him. Then he walked back toward the service corridor without another word. The card was matte black. No name, no logo, no visible number on its face. The front desk attendant, a young man named Derek who had worked the counter for 3 years, saw it first. He was about to call after the man Olivia had already signaled to her security to have him escorted out when Derek's gaze landed on the card, and he stopped moving. His hand came to rest flat on the counter. He did not pick the card up immediately. He simply stared at it the way people stare at something they recognize but are not quite prepared to explain. Charles Whitman, the building's operations director, had been standing near the east reception desk when the incident occurred. He had watched the slap with the same tight-lipped composure he brought to every difficult situation his building produced. He was already composing his mental incident report when he crossed the lobby and saw what Derek was staring at. Charles was 54 years old and had spent 30 of those years working in high-end commercial real estate. He had encountered, in that time, a very specific type of payment instrument exactly twice. The card on the counter was that instrument. He picked it up with the care one reserves for documents of unusual importance and turned it over slowly. There was nothing on the back either, only a small embossed symbol in the lower right corner, barely visible unless you held it at an angle. Charles held it at an angle. He looked toward the service corridor. He looked at the card again. Then he set it down very carefully, straightened his jacket, and pulled out his own phone. Sophia Grant had been watching from 12 feet away with the sharp attention she gave everything that touched Olivia's reputation. She was 28, organized to the point of precision, and she had been with Olivia long enough to read a room's temperature by the posture of the people in it. What she read now made her stomach tighten. The front desk attendant was not behaving like someone who had witnessed a minor employee incident. He was behaving like someone who had found something he was not sure what to do with. And Charles Whitman, who handled crises in buildings like this with the unflappable calm of a man who had seen everything, was making an urgent internal call. Olivia had turned back to her guests, speaking quietly to a couple near the champagne station, working through the disruption with the composed efficiency of someone who had practiced managing difficult moments in public. She had not yet looked at the counter. She had told herself the card was theater, the type of move a man with wounded pride performs to make himself feel less small after an embarrassing situation. She had seen it before. Someone would check. It would be a standard card, or a fake, or a corporate card belonging to a company no one in the room had ever heard of. Security would escort him out, and the evening would continue. What she did not yet know was that the moment the card's embedded chip was read by the building's VIP payment terminal, a system installed at the request of the tower's ownership group 18 months ago, and used only for transactions involving the top tier of the building's private membership, a notification had been sent automatically to 4 people. 3 of those people worked for financial institutions. The 4th was the building's silent primary investor. The system did not generate notifications for standard cards, or premium cards, or even the highest tier of most private bank products. It generated a notification for one category of instrument, only a category so restricted that the average front desk attendant at even the most prestigious addresses would go an entire career without encountering one. Charles found Olivia between the champagne station and the door to the mezzanine, where she had pulled aside to check her phone. He approached with the particular walk of a man who has news he would prefer not to deliver in front of witnesses. He asked quietly if she had a moment. She looked at him with the controlled patience of someone managing multiple demands. He asked again, with slightly more weight behind it. She followed him to the far side of the lobby, near the private elevator bank. He explained what he knew in 4 sentences. He told her that the card the man had placed on the counter was not a standard card. He told her it was a restricted private instrument issued by a single institution and extended to a very small number of individuals, globally fewer than 200. He told her it was associated with strategic investment portfolios, not consumer accounts. And he told her that when the terminal had read the chip, the name that had come back on the building's internal registry was Jonathan Hale. Olivia held his gaze throughout. She was very good at not reacting. She asked Charles what that name was registered as in the building system. Charles paused for exactly 1 beat. Then he said Jonathan Hale was listed as a strategic partner shareholder in the Harrington Property Group. Olivia looked back across the lobby toward the service corridor door. It was closed. The man was gone. She looked at the counter where the card still rested. She asked her assistant to run the name discreetly through their contact database. She kept her face entirely neutral, but inside her, a very specific kind of recalibration was beginning, the kind that comes when you realize the foundation of an action you cannot undo was built on an assumption that was entirely wrong. She found herself thinking about the way he had looked at her after it happened. Not wounded, not angry, not even surprised, really. Just still, the kind of stillness that does not come from shock, the kind that comes from having already decided, a long time ago, not to let certain things move you. The quiet investigation that Sophia ran over the next 40 minutes, using the resources of their firm's financial due diligence team, produced a picture that Olivia had not been prepared for. Jonathan Hale, age 35, listed no current business position beyond facilities manager at Harrington Tower. But that surface was, in the language of people who knew where to look, a very thin and deliberately maintained layer. Below it, a founding role in a closed-end infrastructure fund that had returned 340% over 7 years before a restructuring that distributed its holdings to a small group of long-term partners. A co-architect credit on 2 urban redevelopment financing frameworks that were still considered models in the field. A decade of institutional advisory work done almost entirely off the public record. Assets under management, at the peak, in the range of 9 figures, not for clients, but held directly. And then, 5 years ago, a complete stop. No filings. No appearances. No interviews. Nothing. Sophia had placed the summary on Olivia's phone screen without comment. Olivia had read it once, then read it again. Then she had put her phone face down on the table and looked at the wall for a moment before someone asked her a question, and she returned to the room. What the summary did not explain, what no database could explain, was why. Why a man with that history was running maintenance checks in a building at 10 in the evening, with a paper coffee cup in his hand, wearing a shirt with a frayed collar, collecting a facilities salary. The answer to that question lived in a quieter place than any financial record. Jonathan had met Claire when they were both 24. At a conference neither of them particularly wanted to attend. She had laughed at something he said that was not quite a joke. And the precision of her timing had convinced him she was the only person in the room who had been listening carefully enough. They married at 27. Amelia arrived when they were 28. Claire had died when Amelia was 2. From a condition that announced itself quietly and moved quickly, the way some things do when they are intent on not giving you time to argue with them. In the weeks after, Jonathan had done what he knew how to do. He had structured things. He had placed Amelia's future into a set of arrangements, so airtight and carefully considered that no version of his own failure or absence could touch her. He had wound down his professional life with the same methodical precision he had applied to building it. And then he had made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him, though he never offered it for discussion. Claire had believed, with a conviction he had always respected, but never fully understood until she was gone, that useful work done with your hands was worth more to a person's interior life than useful work done with your mind, at a remove from the physical world. She had grown up watching her father build things literally, with tools, and she had always said that the people who understood how the infrastructure of a place worked, who kept the systems running, were the ones who understood that place more truly than anyone in the offices above them. She had said it lightly, more than once, in the way people say things they mean deeply but don't want to be caught meaning too seriously. Jonathan had taken the position at Harrington Tower with a recommendation from a friend who owned a stake in the property group and who knew, without asking too many questions, what Jonathan needed at that particular point in his life. The salary was not the point. The proximity to something concrete and solvable, a cooling pressure variance, a faulty circuit, a door that would not seat properly in its frame, was the point. The fact that Amelia could reach him by phone at any moment in a building 8 minutes from her school was the point. The fact that no one in the lobby looked at him as anything other than the man who kept things running was, in its own way, exactly the point. There was also this. Jonathan had learned, in the years following Claire's death, that grief without occupation was a different and far more dangerous animal than grief with it. He had watched other people navigate loss by throwing themselves into abstractions, into markets, into deals, into the management of things that existed mostly on paper in offices with sealed windows. He understood, during the months he tried to continue doing exactly that, why it didn't work. The distance between what you were doing and what was real became a space where the mind could run without resolution for years. A pressure system had a correct value. A circuit either held its load, or it didn't. A door fitted properly into its frame, or it required adjustment. These were problems with answers. Working daily among problems with answers kept a certain kind of despair from locating the cracks in a person's structure. He had never told anyone at the building who he was. He didn't tell them now. The reception was winding toward its final hour when Olivia crossed the lobby again, this time without her assistant. Without the particular posture of someone managing a room, she found Jonathan in the service alcove near the building's secondary electrical panel, filling out a maintenance log on a clipboard with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. He did not look up immediately. When he did, his expression offered her nothing, not coldness, not invitation, simply the neutral attention of someone waiting to hear what was needed. She said his name. He nodded once, confirming it. She said she needed to speak with him. He closed the clipboard and rested it against the panel. He waited. She told him she had looked into who he was. She said it with the practiced directness of someone who does not perform self-consciousness, because she had long ago trained herself out of it. She expected him to respond to that, to the implicit acknowledgement of power, asymmetry, the revelation that she now understood the nature of the mistake she had made. He didn't. He just watched her with those steady eyes that kept not doing what she expected eyes to do in this kind of conversation. She asked him what he wanted. It was a CEO's question, the kind that presupposes that every interaction has a transaction at its center. He said he did not want anything. She paused. She told him that was not an answer she was accustomed to receiving in this kind of situation. He said he imagined that was true. She asked him if he intended to pursue any formal action regarding the incident. He looked at her for a moment, as if the question itself required examination, then said no. She asked why not. He said because it was not what he was interested in doing with his evening. She stood with that for a moment. She had expected leverage, or performance, or the particular theater of restrained fury that wealthy men sometimes employed when they wanted to demonstrate they were above retaliation, while making absolutely sure you understood that retaliation was within their reach. He offered none of it. He simply stood there, in his worn shirt, in the dim alcove beside the panel, and gave her no material to work with at all. She left the alcove with less certainty than she had entered it. That feeling, she recognized, was not something she encountered often. Richard Cole arrived at 11 the following morning, not through the building's lobby but through a side entrance, with his personal attorney, and the particular kind of expression that signals a man has decided something before he has walked through the door. He was 61, the managing partner of Cole Capital, and he held a position in the Bennett Lux financial structure that Olivia preferred not to examine too directly on difficult days. His stake in her company was significant. His patience with public complications was not. He had seen the video. Most people with an interest in the Bennett Lux Group had seen the video by that point. It was not a long clip, 17 seconds, but it had been circulating since the previous night, and the comment landscape around it had taken on the particular shape of a story that has found its narrative groove and is no longer requiring new energy to move forward. The man struck. The stillness that followed. The card placed on the counter. The silence. It was, Olivia had to acknowledge, a 17-second film with almost perfect structure. Richard sat across from her in the tower's private conference room on the 38th floor and told her, with the blunt courtesy of a man who has done this many times, that the current situation was not compatible with his continued participation in the next funding round. He said the issue was not the act itself. He was not, he clarified, a moralist, but the optics of an executive who loses control publicly in front of 300 people and an active recording device. He said he had 3 other general partners who had already raised the question, and he was not in a position to override 3 general partners on the basis of goodwill alone. Olivia sat with a level of composure that cost her considerably more than it appeared to. The round in question was not incidental. It was the financing mechanism for the next 18 months of growth, the expansion into the Southeast Asian market, the new sourcing agreements, the brand positioning work that would take Bennett Lux from a well-regarded name into a genuinely global one. Losing it would not end the company, but it would end that version of the company, the version she had been building toward for 4 years. Her CFO, who had been called in and was sitting beside her, had already performed the arithmetic. He had the expression of a man who has done the arithmetic and wishes he had not. The door to the conference room opened. No one had knocked. Jonathan Hale walked in wearing the same kind of shirt he always wore. He looked at the room, assessed the arrangement of the people in it with a brief and efficient scan, then pulled out the chair at the end of the table and sat down. Richard looked at him. Richard's attorney looked at him. Olivia did not look at him, because she was looking at the surface of the table and recalibrating everything she had assumed about the next 12 minutes. Jonathan said he understood the matter they were discussing. He said he would like to propose a framework for resolving it. Richard asked, with the stiff curiosity of someone who is not accustomed to having his conversations entered without invitation, who exactly Jonathan was. Jonathan said his name, first and last, and watched Richard's expression shift through 2 distinct phases, the first a blankness, the second a recognition. What followed in the next 40 minutes was not a performance. It was not leverage being applied, or power being displayed. It was, in the most technical sense, problem-solving. Jonathan laid out an analysis of the public narrative situation that was precise and unsentimental, the video structure, its natural trajectory across different audience segments, the specific intervention points where a well-designed response could alter the curve. He then outlined 3 financial alternatives to the current round structure that addressed Cole Capital's risk concerns without requiring the full pause that Richard's position had implied was necessary. Richard asked 2 questions. Both were good questions, the kind that indicate a listener who is actually evaluating rather than performing evaluation. Jonathan answered both directly, with the quiet fluency of someone who has spent years thinking through exactly this category of problem. The room was very quiet. At the end of the 40 minutes, Richard told his attorney they would not need the prepared documentation. He looked at Olivia and said he would be in contact by the end of the week. He shook Jonathan's hand on the way out, not the performance of a handshake, but an actual one. When the room had cleared to just the 2 of them, Olivia sat for a moment without speaking. The man who had been slapped publicly in her lobby the previous evening had just preserved the financial architecture of her company's next 4 years. She could not decide, in that moment, which part of that was harder to hold. She looked at him and said his name. He looked at her and waited. She asked him why he had done it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he had done it because the problem was solvable and he happened to be in the room. She said that was not a complete answer. He said most complete answers weren't very efficient. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular deliberateness of someone who does not practice this kind of thing, and is therefore doing it in the only way she knows how without technique, she said she was sorry. She said it directly. She said it without qualification or the ambient language of excuse that apologies sometimes grow around. She said it, and then she waited. The same way he had been waiting for her throughout. He looked at her for a long moment. He nodded once, not as forgiveness, not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement. As if she had placed something on the table, and he had confirmed he had seen it. He did not say it was fine, because they both understood it had not been. He did not tell her she didn't need to apologize, because she had needed to and she had. He simply received it with the same stillness he had brought to everything else, and let it settle between them as something real. It was Amelia who changed the register of the room entirely. Sophia had brought her up from the lobby. Jonathan had arranged for her to be dropped off at the building after school, a routine already established, and Amelia had walked into the conference room holding a granola bar and looking around with the frank curiosity of a child who does not interpret the presence of serious adults as a reason to reduce her own presence. She looked at Olivia the way children look at people they are seeing for the first time and have already decided to form an opinion about directly, without social filter, with the particular intelligence of someone who has not yet learned to hide the fact that they are measuring. Olivia had turned toward her with a smile that, even in this room after this hour, was genuine. There was something about the child that made performance feel more difficult than usual. Amelia looked at her for a moment, then at her father, then back at Olivia. She said, with the tone of someone reporting a conclusion, rather than making conversation, "People make mistakes, but good people fix them." She said it without drama, without the self-consciousness of a child delivering a wisdom it has been taught to deliver. She said it the way she said everything because it was what she had observed, and it seemed worth saying. Olivia held the child's gaze. She did not speak for a moment. When she did, she said that was exactly right. Amelia seemed satisfied. She looked around the conference room with the same frank inventory, and asked if there was a window that faced the river, because her teacher had said you could see it from the tall buildings, and she had not yet checked. Jonathan told her the one on the east wall was probably the best. She went to look. Olivia watched her go, and remained very still. There are moments when the architecture of a person's self-understanding shifts not because of one large thing, but because several smaller things have accumulated, and the whole suddenly reorganizes around them. This was one of those moments for her. She did not have language for all of it yet, but she felt it as clearly as she felt the late afternoon light through the east window, where a 7-year-old was standing on her tiptoes to see if the river was where her teacher said it would be. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's company did not transform dramatically. It continued doing what it had been doing, growing by design, meeting its targets, executing the strategies she had spent years building. But some things shifted at the edges. She began arriving at certain decisions more slowly. She started asking staff members questions before situations had become problems, rather than after. She sat in one meeting where a junior designer was presenting a concept she had already decided against, and found herself, for the first time in a long time, listening not for the confirmation of what she had already concluded, but for the things she might have missed. She did not announce any of this, or document it, or frame it for anyone as growth. She simply did it, quietly, in the way changes that are real tend to happen. Jonathan continued going to work each morning. He continued checking the pressure systems and reviewing the maintenance logs and knowing, in his particular way, exactly how every system in the building was functioning. He continued picking Amelia up from school on his longer days and being there when she got home on the shorter ones. He continued cooking the meals she preferred and listening to her describe, at length, and with great precision, the things she had noticed that day that she thought he would find interesting, which was, as it turned out, most things. He did not tell Amelia about what had happened at the reception, or about the meeting in the conference room, or about any of it. There was no version of the story she needed at 7. There would be versions she needed later, at different ages, as the questions she carried became more specific. He would answer them when they arrived. Olivia texted him on a Thursday, 16 days after the evening in the lobby. It was a short message. It said she was going to be at the building on Friday afternoon for a walkthrough of the new Terrace renovation plans, and that, if he happened to have time after his shift, she would be glad for his opinion on the structural questions in the design she had learned. She said that he knew this building better than anyone. He replied with 2 words. Sounds reasonable. On Friday afternoon, when the walkthrough had finished, and Sophia and the architect had both found reasons to leave, Olivia and Jonathan stood on the half-renovated terrace on the 22nd floor, while the city moved below them. The sky had the particular pale quality of early autumn, when the light goes lower but stays long. Amelia was downstairs in the lobby, having been collected from school an hour earlier, working through a drawing she had started that morning with the complete absorption children bring to things they have decided matter. Olivia looked out at the skyline and said, without making it a question, that she supposed he had seen it this whole time, what this city looked like from up here. He said yes. He had always found it useful to know what the view looked like from the places people assumed were only meant for work. She turned toward him at that, and there was something in the angle of her expression, not a smile exactly, but the precondition of one that was different from anything she had brought to any of the conversations before. She asked him if he had any interest in dinner at some point, a real one, she said, not a meeting with food. She did not dress it up or qualify it. She offered it plainly. The way she had offered the apology, which was the only way she knew to offer things that mattered. He considered it for a moment, in the way he considered everything without performance, without speed, with the kind of attention that made the person being considered feel, on some level, genuinely seen. Then he said that depended. He said Amelia had strong opinions about restaurants, and he generally found it easier to run those things past her first. Olivia looked down at the lobby level through the terrace glass, where Amelia was still drawing, oblivious to the altitude and the conversation above her, thoroughly occupied by something only she could see. She said that seemed entirely fair. The sky went pale and long above the city. Down below, a 7-year-old finished her drawing, held it up, studied it once, and decided it was good.